Chapter 26, The Dark and the Dawn. In the weeks that followed, Hermione made countless attempts to pull Harry away from his obsession with the Deathly Hallows. Unfortunately, none of her efforts seemed to make a difference. Before the battle at Azkaban, the Order had rallied around Harry's passion and leadership, but now he had become withdrawn, even appearing distracted when he was around Ginny. Hermione could sense his mind drifting back to the Hallows in the midst of every conversation. "I shouldn't have told him about the Elder Wand," Draco admitted one evening as he and Hermione huddled together in the library, the door securely locked and Muffliato cast to keep their voices private. "Why not?" Hermione asked, curiosity piqued. "Because," Draco replied, twirling a loose curl of her hair around his fingertip. He still bore the signs of fatigue but looked less haggard than he had in the week following the Azkaban incident. If he thought he had to go through Snape to obtain all 3 Hallows, would he be this obsessed? Hermione sighed. "Yes, I think he would. The last time I saw Harry like this was when?" He prompted. "Well, it was last year when he was convinced you joined the Death Eaters. When Harry fixates on something like this, he never lets go." Meanwhile, as Harry became increasingly consumed with the snitch, Voldemort's influence loomed over the nation like a dark thunderhead. The Azkaban breakout had thrust the conflict into the open, and by late February, the Daily Prophet was reporting on skirmishes erupting across the country. Almost daily, the Order received intelligence from sympathizers about Muggle hunts. In response, the Ministry had begun demolishing monuments honoring prominent Muggleborns while also shutting down gathering places for goblins, vampires, and other magical beings. The Order dispatched battalions from their fortress safehouse to combat these efforts, but the reports from the small battles troubled Hermione deeply. Most bystanders did nothing to oppose the Ministry or the Death Eaters. Some even joined in their efforts against the Order. It was becoming increasingly clear that the Prophet's narrative, a disinformation campaign, had taken root, complicating matters even further. To make things worse, the Twins' wizarding wireless program was forced to change frequencies with every broadcast to thwart the Death Eaters from jamming their signals. Hermione worried that the Daily Potter was barely reaching even a fraction of the audience that its ministry-controlled counterpart managed to attract. As a result, the Order was filled with anticipation for their upcoming pamphlet flyover. Thanks to their allies at the monastery safehouse, who were dedicated to magically multiplying the pamphlets, they would soon have thousands upon thousands to distribute. Revealing the truth about numerous events that had transpired since last year, "We'll have to drop them all in one mission," Kingsley said. "I'll bet that within an hour of the first leaflet hitting the ground, they'll push through a law to establish aerial patrols." The final piece of the puzzle for the flyover was securing broomsticks. The Bulgarian Quidditch team had sent over a dozen firebolts, courtesy of Victor Crumb, which would be enough for the Order members spearheading the operation in London and Hogsmeade. However, broomsticks were expensive, and now, with nearly 60 locations mapped out across the country, they would need not just a cache of brooms but a fleet. Hermione tried to remind Harry of the urgency of this endeavor, but he seemed unable to focus. Even worse, he remained just as disengaged from their discussions about Hufflepuff's cup, despite Hermione developing a new theory regarding the final hidden horcrux. One afternoon, as they sat in the library, she shared, "We've discovered every hiding place but one. The thing is, only some of them are actually hiding places, if you think about it." Ron frowned and asked, "What do you mean?" "I mean that Voldemort didn't really hide the diary," Hermione explained. "He gave it to Draco's father for future use. And he doesn't hide Nagini either. He sends her out to attack people. So, really, only 3 of the horcruxes were hidden: the ring, the diadem, and the locket." "That's true," Draco said slowly, tapping one finger on the table as he considered her words. "Complete history of the Founders 4. So, you're asking whether the cup was meant to be hidden or used?" "Yeah," Ron replied, a frown creasing his brow. "It would make sense to split it 3 and 3, wouldn't it? 3 to hide, 3 to use." "I thought so too," Hermione said, flipping through her notes. "I found something interesting about the cup here. It's a historical account of Helga Hufflepuff's Revels of Goodwill, written by a witch who attended one of the celebrations. Apparently, lifelong friendships began at the revels, and couples who got married often met there. Every guest drank from Hufflepuff's own cup at the start of the evening, as a symbol of trust, loyalty, and good faith. Those who drank from the cup seemed to bond in a way that was almost magical. So, Harry chimed in, having remained quiet for a while and now gazing listlessly out of the window. Hermione shot him a glare. So, it sounds like something Voldemort might use, doesn't it? A cup of loyalty that binds people together? Ron looked puzzled. Yeah, but that doesn't help us figure out where he'd keep it, does it? Well, no, Hermione conceded, her tone clipped. I suppose not. Draco, sensing her frustration, stretched out his long legs, breaking the silence that had settled over them. I have an idea. How about I, Master of the Elder Wand, use legilimency on the Dark Lord to find out where the cup is, now that I'm unbeatable? Ron rolled his eyes. How about you, Master of the Elder Wand? Stop being such a git about it all the time. A smile tugged at Hermione's lips, but she regarded the Elder Wand with lingering mistrust. While she appreciated how it had helped save Draco at Azkaban, the thought of a wand that had tempted so many wizards to commit murder unsettled her. You know perfectly well that bringing that wand anywhere near Voldemort wouldn't be sensible. Way, Harry murmured, seemingly to himself. Hermione shot annoyed glances at Draco and Ron, but none of them responded to Harry. Given his obsession with the Hallows, Hermione felt they should count themselves lucky that Harry hadn't shown any interest in taking the Elder Wand from Draco. Yet, Harry appeared perfectly at ease with the wand so close by, far too engrossed in the snitch to concern himself with anything else. So, Malfoy, Ron said, turning to Draco, have you managed to get any information out of your parents yet? Besides this, you mean? Draco replied, holding up a sheaf of notes he had compiled over the past few weeks about the Death Eaters. The notes detailed everything his parents had shared, each Death Eater's talents, weaknesses, and histories. Eventually, they would use this information to find a contact who could help Draco slip back into the fold. Ron waved the notes aside. Yeah, besides that. I mean, do you think they know anything about the cup or the horcruxes? Unlikely. Draco tucked the Elder Wand behind his ear. My father and I have talked about the diary a few times now, and I can tell he has no clue what it really was. I even managed to steer the conversation toward the Founder's artifacts a few nights ago, but both he and my mother seem convinced that they've all been lost for decades or even centuries, aside from the sword. Hermione frowned thoughtfully at his notes. Well, maybe next time you can ask more vaguely about treasures Voldemort might have in his possession or something. But I think you should wait a bit before bringing it up again. We don't want them to get suspicious about your sudden interest. True, Ron said, flopping back onto the worn rug. Also, have they stopped asking you to spy on us yet? Draco's mouth tightened. No. But they've been cooped up here for months now. They obviously just want to feel like they still have control over the situation. Or they're just ungrateful gits, Ron muttered. Snorted, listen, no offense, but I really think we should uninvite them from meals. We wanted to be civil, sure, but if they keep asking you to stab us in the back every other day, that's not going to work. Plus, we're losing valuable time with the Order because we can't discuss our plans as long as your mum and dad are hanging around. Hermione, sensing the tension, jumped in quickly. I think he's right, Draco. Those extra hours are becoming increasingly important these days. And honestly, I doubt your parents will be disappointed. She forced a humorless laugh. I mean, every time one of them has to sit next to Remus or Hagrid or me, it's like someone's cast Petrificus Totalis on them. Draco's shoulders slumped slightly. All right, I'll tell them. He pulled the Elder Wand from behind his ear again, twirling it idly between his long fingers as he met Hermione's gaze. He had become increasingly evasive with eye contact lately, even during their late-night conversations. Hermione didn't know the reason for it. But she was certain it had something to do with Azkaban. Sometimes, she sensed there was something Draco wasn't sharing with her, something hanging between them like delicate spider silk, but whenever she tried to reach for it, it seemed to drift away, as if caught in a breeze. And she, too, felt there was something she hadn't voiced after the battle. She hadn't confessed how she had screamed and fought to get back to him after the cave-in. Nor had she admitted how Ted and Andromeda, a Muggle-born and a pureblood, had made her envision a possible future with Draco. Surely, such thoughts were far too serious to share after such a relatively short time together. Hermione also hadn't revealed that her nightmares about Azkaban rarely involved Dementors. Instead, they featured a frozen hand protruding from the rubble, the same hand that had played with her hair or teased the neckline of her jumper at night, the hand that was still twirling the Elder Wand now. She had looked too, with a flutter of excitement in her chest. Hermione quickly turned away, casting a discreet glance at Ron to ensure he hadn't noticed anything amiss. But Ron was engrossed in flipping through her notes, completely oblivious to her unease. Hermione felt her nerves begin to settle. She was finally starting to relax around both Ron and Draco. In the aftermath of Azkaban, Hermione had worried that the Dementor's influence might have intensified Ron's feelings of rejection from the previous October. To her immense relief, the months that followed had allowed him to move past those feelings. She had always teased Ron about being emotionally oblivious, but the truth was, he had been particularly sensitive the year before, especially when he suspected that she and Harry were trying to steal romantic moments together. So, Hermione had prepared herself for the possibility that Ron might still be touchy about her attentions, which meant she and Draco would have to keep their distance to avoid raising his suspicions. Surprisingly, Ron seemed just relieved that none of them held his long absence against him. While he still gave Draco a hard time about their shared history, there was no real animosity between them anymore. In fact, Ron was often too preoccupied with his own duties within the Order to dwell on past grievances. Impressed by his bravery at Azkaban, Kingsley and McGonagall had enlisted him to help plan the movements and strategies of the safe houses. Hermione would often see him stepping in and out of the fireplace in the front room, having just returned from one of the 4 safe houses. Oddly enough, Percy had even started taking attentive notes on Ron's ideas, yet there was one thing Hermione couldn't quite wrap her head around. Ron had always loved to talk about his accomplishments, sometimes to the point of boasting, but whenever she broached the subject of what had happened at Azkaban, he would dodge the topic with an air of embarrassment. Her curiosity was finally piqued in early March when Draco turned to Ron during one of their afternoon meetings and said, "Weasley, I need a favor." Draco's eyes flickered briefly toward Hermione, and she understood instantly. Draco's request implied that he was asking for Hermione's help as well. "Yeah?" Ron replied, curious. "What is it?" "I want to visit whichever safe house has Pansy Parkinson." A flush crept across Ron's face, resembling an accelerated sunburn. "Why?" he exclaimed, perhaps a bit too loudly. Hermione raised her eyebrows. While none of them had particularly liked Pansy during their school days, it should be clear why Draco might want to speak with her. "She'll have expected me to do it weeks ago," Draco explained. "She knows I'm alive. It's why she helped us at the manor." "Right, well." Ron cleared his throat and began to sift through books about Helga Hufflepuff. "We don't want everyone knowing where the safe houses are, so I'll bring her here tomorrow afternoon. Shall I?" "Not if it's going to give you a stroke, Weasley," Draco said, eyeing the frantic movements of Ron's hands. "Look, I know you hate Pansy, but try not to insult her so much that she takes it out on me, would you?" "I won't," Ron grunted. "It's fine, Harry," Hermione chimed in. "We should thank her, too." Harry looked up from the snitch he was holding. "What?" Hermione rolled her eyes. "Oh, never mind. I'll drag you there, and you can sit in silence while I do it." "Perfect, thanks," he replied vaguely, while Ron and Draco chuckled. The next morning, Pansy Parkinson stepped out of the fireplace at Order headquarters. She looked significantly changed since her time in Azkaban. They had provided robes for most of the escaped prisoners, and Pansy had tailored hers, dark blue, to fit stylishly. Her dark hair was now cut to her shoulders and gleamed, but she still appeared skeletal, with deep circles under her eyes. She had always had a hard expression. Now, she looked downright intimidating. "So," Ron grunted, avoiding eye contact and focusing on a spot several feet to the left of Pansy. "This is headquarters." Pansy's gaze swept over Ron. "I gathered. Her gaze swept across the room, and a smile broke across her lips. Draco. Pansy, he replied, returning her smile. Meanwhile, Hermione busied herself with tying her hair back, trying to ignore the sudden tightness in her stomach. Ron, who had been glancing between Draco and Pansy with his jaw clenched, cleared his throat. "The library's free," he announced. They followed Ron down the hall, and Hermione noticed the back of his neck was flushed as they entered the reading room. "Go on, then, catch up." "Whatever you, yeah." He turned on his heel, clearly eager to escape. "You mean you aren't staying for the class reunion?" Pansy asked, her tone teasing. Ron froze mid-step, then quickly nodded. "Fine." "Sure, muffliato." He aimed his wand at the door but fumbled the spell, causing it to swing open and hit him squarely in the jaw. He let out a loud curse, then slammed the door shut with his shoulder. When he turned back to Pansy, Draco, Harry, and a wide-eyed Hermione, his face was crimson. Pansy ignored his embarrassment and turned to Draco as if nothing had happened. "Well, come here," she said with a hint of irritation, and they exchanged a brief hug. "I'm still angry with you." She gave him a playful push before flopping back onto the couch. "You could have found some way to tell me." "I'll keep that in mind for the next time I have to fake my death in a hurry," he replied, sharing a smirk with Pansy. A pang of jealousy shot through Hermione, sharper this time, and she quickly shoved it aside, irritated with herself. Draco and Pansy had broken up over a year ago, yet their matching expressions stirred memories of everything they had shared. They had grown up together, their families intertwined. Draco and Pansy had enjoyed the kind of silly, public affection that Hermione often found juvenile, yet now, she couldn't help but envision herself sharing those moments with Draco in the halls of Hogwarts, heat rushing to her cheeks. In frustration, she plopped down in her chair a bit harder than intended. Pansy glanced in Hermione's direction, causing Hermione to tighten her grip on her knees. Pansy had always looked at her with nothing but disdain, and although that scorn seemed to be absent now, Hermione couldn't shake the memory of Pansy once declaring to Witch Weekly, seen by the entire country, that Hermione was really ugly and had been slipping love potions to Harry. But when Hermione mustered the courage to say, "Thank you for helping us at Christmas, Pansy," the response was simply, "You're welcome." The tone in Pansy's voice was so different from the usual sneer she had at Hogwarts that some of Hermione's irritation began to fade. Harry added another awkward thank you to the conversation, but Ron, sitting at the opposite end of the sofa from Pansy, didn't even glance her way. "Are your parents here, Draco?" Pansy asked. "Yeah," Draco replied, "our tent's in the back garden. Do they know you're up to?" Pansy's gaze swept around the room. "All this? Do yours know why you landed in Azkaban?" Draco shot back. "Oh, of course." Pansy flicked a lock of dark hair back from her forehead. "I told them every tiny detail, and then they baked me biscuits and told me I was the perfect daughter who could do no wrong." Hermione let out a snort. She had never heard Pansy Parkinson say anything remotely funny, and at the same moment, Ron made a strangled sound that could have been a laugh. Pansy turned to Ron, but he quickly forced his face into a neutral expression. "I suppose all your family is here, too?" Pansy asked Ron. Ron hesitated, as if contemplating whether to pretend he hadn't heard her. Then he nodded, "Except Charlie." The two words hung oddly in the air of the library. Hermione blinked several times, trying to process them. A glance at Draco confirmed that she wasn't the only one wondering how Pansy Parkinson knew about Ron's older brothers. Ron's face turned a deeper shade of red. "Yeah. Except Charlie," he confirmed. "Is that how you spent your time in Azkaban, Pansy?" Draco asked, curling up like a cat in his chair. "Keeping track of the Weasleys' status?" "Ron hasn't told you?" Pansy raised an eyebrow, a hint of mischief in her voice. "We were next-door neighbors." Hermione felt as if she'd just been struck. "No," she spluttered, "Ron didn't mention anything like that." "It never came up," Ron said, his ears turning bright red. In that moment, Hermione understood why he had been dodging her questions. A startled laugh bubbled up in her throat, which she had to suppress. On some level, Ron had started to fancy Pansy while they were in Azkaban. And now that they were free, he was acting this way, because, well, he was Ron, of course. After what felt like 20 minutes of awkward conversation, Ron suddenly declared to the room that Pansy could stay for dinner at headquarters if she wanted. He then left before she could even respond. Later, during dinner, Hermione noticed Ron chatting with Kingsley and McGonagall, making more references than necessary to topics like national movements and plans for our next steps in London. After each of these serious-sounding statements, he would glance over at Pansy, who was sitting 2 seats away, as if hoping she was listening. Yet he never actually attempted to engage her in conversation. After dinner, they agreed to share 1 butterbeer before Pansy returned to the safe house and Draco headed off to his parents' tent. With a good meal in their stomachs, the atmosphere in the library felt more relaxed. They chatted for a while about Hogwarts. Dobby had delivered a report the previous afternoon, mentioning that graffiti reading Dumbledore's army was now appearing in the halls every night, which Hermione immediately attributed to Neville. There were also frequent fights breaking out among students, those with Death Eater ties, those standing by Harry and the Order, and those torn between believing the Prophet's account of events. However, as they spoke about school, the conversation soon shifted. Hogwarts felt so distant, as if it were halfway across the world. So, Pansy said, crossing her ankles on the ottoman, "What do you order people do all day?" "We can't say," Ron replied. "It's confidential." Pansy took a sip of her butterbeer. "Fine. I won't help, then." Ron frowned. "How could you help? Maybe you'd find out if you told me anything." "Wait," Hermione whispered, straightening in her seat. "Ron, maybe she can help." "What?" Ron asked, surprised. "How?" Hermione turned to Pansy. "Your father works for Nimbus, doesn't he, as a chief broom designer?" "Yes." Understanding dawned on Ron and Draco. There must be storehouses for Nimbus broomsticks, and surely Mr. Parkinson had visited them. Perhaps he had even taken Pansy along to one. Whether directly or indirectly, she could be their source for the flyover fleet. "Hold on," Ron said. "Do you actually want to help?" For the first time, he looked Pansy in the eye. "I wouldn't have offered if I didn't." "But why?" "If you haven't noticed," Pansy said, one corner of her mouth twitching, "the last year of my life hasn't exactly been ideal. I preferred the way things were before all this." "Yeah, but you realize that if you help us, that makes you a blood traitor, and an informant to the Order, right?" Hermione waited for another sardonic remark, but Pansy simply looked at Ron and, sounding almost disappointed, said, "I thought I told you to remember the things I said." Ron's cheeks flushed. Unsure of how to respond, Hermione cleared her throat. "It's more than that, Pansy. If you know the Order's plans, you should stay at headquarters with the rest of us for security's sake. And unless you think your parents will feel the same way you do, you'll have to split up." Pansy's eyelids flickered for a moment, but she otherwise seemed unfazed. "When do I move in?" Arrangements were made with the rest of the Order. After Pansy returned to her safe house to pack, Draco and Hermione slipped into the kitchen to tackle the towering pile of dishes. "So," Draco murmured to Hermione as they began washing up, "how long do you think it'll take Weasley to do something about this?" Hermione let out a sigh. "Oh, thank goodness I'm not the only one who noticed." "Merlin, how could I miss it?" Draco replied, drying a plate with a flick of his wand. "It felt like he was trying to impress me over dinner." "And were you impressed?" "Very. Watch out, Granger. Weasley's coming for my heart." Hermione chuckled. "Do you think she fancies him too?" She glanced over her shoulder, making sure the kitchen was empty. "That would make telling him about us a lot easier, wouldn't it? All I'll say is, I don't think she made that joke about her parents for my benefit." They continued washing in silence for a few moments, each trying to suppress smiles, but then, as Hermione glanced at Draco's suds-covered hands, she noticed the darkened outline of the dark mark peeking out from beneath his rolled sleeves, and her amusement faded. "I've been thinking," she said softly. "Have you?" "I have." She pointed to the snake and skull. and I think it's time we gave that unraveling charm a try. The next morning, Pansy returned to stay in Professor McGonagall's tartan tent, as McGonagall now resided at the monastery safe house. Ron seemed too flustered by this turn of events to mention it directly, but during meetings about the flyover, Hermione often caught him stealing glances at the corner where Pansy sat. 2 weeks before he does anything, Draco bet Hermione under his breath during one of those meetings. Her lips twitched in amusement. 2 months, more like, she whispered back. He can't even say hello when she walks into a room. What on earth do you think happened in Azkaban? Anyway, ask him for all the details, Draco replied, a teasing glint in his eyes. The sordid details, Draco murmured. Oh, yes, that'll go over well. Secretly, Hermione was relieved that she and Draco could find humor in their situation. The tangled web of past, present, secret, and half-realized relationships was starting to give her a headache. Sometimes, when she laughed at one of Ron's jokes during their discussions about horcruxes, she could feel Draco's gaze lingering on them, and the room would suddenly feel too small. On the flip side, when Hermione was discussing reports of snatcher raids and Ron was listening intently, Pansy would saunter by in a way that seemed perfectly designed to divert his attention from her. It worked in reverse, too. Whenever Pansy and Draco sat together at mealtimes, Hermione found herself watching them, unwillingly envisioning the two of them tangled together, much like Ron and Lavender had once been. One day at lunch, Pansy, who had an annoyingly casual way of being physical with Draco, flicked his wrist with one of her nails. The sound of a loud thunk made Hermione look over, only to see that Ron had knocked over a tureen of gravy. From that moment on, he hadn't spoken to Draco for the rest of the evening. Hermione attributed it all to the cramped quarters of headquarters. They were constantly stepping on each other's toes, and no one was willing to admit their true feelings. She often scolded herself, reminding herself that her feelings didn't matter in the grand scheme of the Order's work. While most of the Order was preparing for the flyover, Hermione dedicated her time to working on Draco's dark mark. She reasoned that it was important on a larger scale, too. After all, it would eventually be crucial to make Draco a believable double agent to the Death Eaters. Over the course of a week and a half, she and Draco measured the effects of protean charms and the Unraveler on various organic materials, like an apple and a slice of ham, which ended up far worse for the wearer. Once they finished modifying the charm, they were ready to test it on the. As Hermione stepped into the library that afternoon, she noticed Draco go completely still. Lupin and Tonks trailed closely behind her, adding to the already charged atmosphere. Taking a shaky breath, she addressed Draco. I'd like Remus and Tonks to assist us with the process. Tonks's aura training could be invaluable if we encounter a curse aspect to the enchantment that we haven't anticipated, and Remus has significantly more experience with physical magic than I do. After a brief moment of contemplation, Draco nodded and rolled up his sleeve. Tonks settled onto the sofa beside him to examine the dark mark. Ugly thing, isn't it? She remarked, wrinkling her nose. I'll put in a word to the designer. Draco replied with a hint of sarcasm. Remus smiled and drew his wand. I think it's best to start with a few simpler charms before we tackle the Unraveler. We need to ensure that interfering with the protean charm won't trigger something in the mark that could harm you. Do you mind, Draco? No, Draco said. He paused, scrutinizing Remus's face with his sharp gray eyes before adding, thank you. It's my pleasure, Remus replied calmly. If we succeed, you might be the first person ever to be freed from the Dark Mark's enchantment. As Lupin moved his wand over Draco's forearm, Hermione felt a surge of gratitude for their former professor. She realized that he was the only member of the Order who had never spoken ill of Draco, always treating him with patience and respect. It was as if he had been waiting for Draco to change. Hermione also recognized that it was Lupin's same kindness that had helped Tonks cope in the weeks following Azkaban. Since the death of her parents, Tonks's hair had been dull and lifeless, and she had barely spoken except to discuss the Order's strategies. But recently, there was a transformation in her demeanor. She had become more focused and determined. At the mention of Fenrir Greyback, she would go still, like someone bracing for an impending attack. Hermione suspected that her deep-seated loathing for Greyback was only growing stronger. was no less daunting because he had been the one to bite Remus as a child. Tonks had her wand drawn, poised and ready. But as Lupin moved his wand over Draco's forearm, nothing happened. "Well," Lupin said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice, "I think we may be able to tackle the charm right here." "Hermione, are you ready?" "I think so." Hermione took a deep breath, locking eyes with Draco. "It might hurt." "I'd be surprised if it doesn't," he replied, his tone lacking any humor. "And if you'd prefer Remus to do it, I'll understand." "No," Draco interjected quickly. A faint blush crept into his cheeks as he focused intently on the mark. "No. You do it." Tonks raised her eyebrows in surprise but chose not to comment. Hermione felt her face heat up. Lately, it seemed that everything she and Draco said to each other was a loaded confession, teetering on the brink of being misinterpreted by those around them. With those 4 words from Draco, could Remus and Tonks now understand why she had fought so fiercely against them in the halls of Azkaban? It hadn't been fear for the rest of the group, but for him. And if they realized the truth, could she trust them to keep it from the rest of the Order? Hermione pushed those thoughts aside. She had to focus. Lowering the tip of her wand to the dark mark, she noticed a muscle in the crook of Draco's elbow tense as she moved her wand in a circle above the mark, tracing a figure 8 upon his skin while speaking the incantation, Instora Individua. Draco went rigid, his face contorting in pain. In a sudden rush, he reached out and grabbed her hand, and in that moment, Hermione forgot about Remus and Tonks, forgetting everything except for his suffering. She held on tightly. "It's all right," she gasped. Gradually, she saw the raised redness of the scarred area on his forearm begin to fade. "You're all right. It's working, I see it. Just a bit longer." "Longer." Draco panted, small sounds escaping through his clenched teeth. Every instinct in Hermione urged her to lift the wand from his skin, to stop inflicting pain on him, but she forced herself to keep it steady. "Almost done," Tonks said, while Remus gripped Draco's shoulder firmly. "That's it." With a sigh of relief, Draco went limp as the last of the raised skin smoothed back into place. Hermione immediately lowered her wand, her other hand slipping down to rest on his knee, but when Draco opened his eyes, horror washed over his face. "No." He stared down at his forearm in disbelief. The red scarring had flattened, but in its place was a stark black tattoo of the dark mark. "It's supposed to be gone. Why isn't it gone?" "Didn't it work? I believe the curse has lifted," Remus replied. "You can touch it now." Draco ran his fingers over his forearm. Although the sensation only caused a slight indentation in the skin, he shook his head in frustration. But the tattoo was part of the curse. "It should have disappeared too. It must be an adaptation effect," Tonks said, her expression grave. "The protean charm isn't designed for use on something that's alive." "I think that tattoo is here to stay." Draco's face turned as pale as his hair. "Forever? I'm not entirely sure," Remus said, leaning in with a frown. "May I?" Draco offered his arm, and Remus brought it closer to the light of his glowing wand tip. "There," Remus said. "You see, the detail on the snake's nose, it seems to have faded, but it's darkening again now. What does that mean?" Draco asked, anxiety creeping into his voice. "Do we need to do it again?" "I think it needs to be repeated, yes," Remus replied, sitting back on his haunches. "But I wouldn't attempt it again for at least a day, Draco. Charms like this can be abrasive, and you risk causing permanent damage to your skin or nerves. However, if you repeat the charm daily, the tattoo should lighten over time." Hermione nodded. Noticing Draco's sudden embarrassment at having revealed his fear to Remus and Tonks, he quickly averted his gaze as he rolled his sleeve back down over the dark mark. In the ensuing silence, Hermione realized her hand was still resting on Draco's knee. They both moved at once. She jerked her fingers back just as he twitched his leg to the side. Draco's cheeks had turned pink, and Hermione could feel warmth flooding her own face. A quick glance at Remus and Tonks told her there was no point in pretending. "It's all right," Remus said, raising a hand in a calming gesture. "We won't tell anyone, if you both want to keep this. Whatever it is. To yourselves." His kind eyes shifted to Draco. I can imagine how your parents might react. Dora and I have faced something similar ourselves. Yeah, Tonks added, her voice carrying an odd tension. She studied Draco intently, as if seeing him for the first time. You know, my mum talked a lot about you and your family. I bet you didn't hear anything about us, did you? Draco became very still. No. Nothing. Well, Tonks tried to blink away the moisture in her eyes, frustration crossing her features as she wiped at them. Anyway, Mum always said that most of the family was a lost cause, but she wanted to try, when you were of age, I mean. She wanted to reach out to you. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she continued, I reckon that would have gone all right, that's all. Draco nodded slowly, I think so, too. Meanwhile, Narcissa Malfoy stood hidden within a hedge. For nearly 2 months, she and Lucius had been concealing themselves among the evergreen branches surrounding the Potter cottage. The lines of their extendable ears snaked magically up to the windows, allowing them to gather just enough information to satisfy Bella's insatiable curiosity. In recent months, the revelation of Aberforth Dumbledore and Augusta Longbottom had granted them a fleeting sense of goodwill. It had opened up a vast network of Order sympathizers for the Death Eaters to target and disrupt. After the breakout at Azkaban, however, Bella had been too preoccupied to check in for 2 weeks. During that silence, Narcissa found herself wondering if Bella had felt anything, if only for a moment, after Andromeda's death. She even speculated whether that silence was somehow tied to Andromeda's passing, but when Bella finally reached out, it was with nothing but excitement for the Dark Lord's impending return. The prophet has done its work, she had declared with glee. The nation is ready to accept him as minister for magic. Since then, Narcissa and Lucius had achieved only minor victories. With their expulsion from the Order's gatherings, they could no longer piece together fragments of timing or location. They had managed to report the Order's wizarding wireless frequency once, allowing the Death Eaters to jam the signal for a week, until the Weasley twins caught on and began shuffling frequencies. They had also noted the presence of Pansy Parkinson, whom they had spotted through a window. Otherwise, the Order had been diligent in using the Muffly-Auto charm, leaving the Malfoys with nothing but a faint, indistinct buzz. We need more substantial information. Lucius said one chilly afternoon in mid-March, pacing back and forth in front of the hearth in their tent. One decisive blow against the Order, and Draco will realize their forces must be overwhelmed. He'll tell us every plan he's heard over these past months. He mentioned he was considering it. He will join us. Narcissa remained silent. Ever since the battle at Azkaban, Lucius had been losing sleep, repeatedly clinging to that sliver of hope regarding Draco. Her husband seemed to interpret Andromeda's death as yet another sign that the only path to saving them all was to return to the Death Eaters. He was weaving elaborate fantasies about their redemption within the Dark Order. There was a glimmer of hope that they could deliver Harry Potter to the Dark Lord. Yet, for Narcissa, her sister's death did not ignite any sense of purpose. Yes, Andromeda and her husband had died loyal to the Order. But hadn't Alistair Crabbe, a friend since their Hogwarts days and a devoted Death Eater, suffered the Dementor's kiss in the same battle? Azkaban had taught her one harsh lesson: death was omnipresent, always lurking, inching ever closer to her family. These days, Narcissa found herself reflecting on Andromeda's Muggle-born husband, Ted Tonks, who was now also dead. She recalled the time before Andromeda had revealed the truth about Ted, when she tried to present him to the family as someone of acceptable lineage. She had told Narcissa and Bellatrix that he was a bookseller at Flourish Blotts, just a few years out of Hogwarts, with an interest in preserving old spell texts, but attending those specialized schools in Greece or Japan required serious money. That's how Andromeda had phrased it, as if his only flaw was financial. But you'll never believe how handsome he is, Andromeda had once said to them. It's a bit silly, really, and nothing phases him. I don't think even you could intimidate him, Bella. They had all laughed at that. Narcissa vividly remembered how Andromeda had looked at her reflection in the mirror, preparing for a night out, a rare blush gracing her cheeks. Andromeda, vibrant yet composed, Andromeda, so clearly smitten. And now, Andromeda was gone, her last words a heartfelt declaration of love for that man. part of Narcissa had always hoped Andromeda would wake up one day, remember her heritage, and return to the family, yearning for reconciliation. But she had loved Ted Tonks until her very last breath. These were the memories Narcissa sifted through as she wandered through hedge after hedge. Day after day, while late winter slowly gave way to spring. Then, one day in March, without warning, it happened. Standing in a hedge near a cottage window, Narcissa braced herself for the familiar sound of the muffly auto charm, ready to move to a new hedge, a new room. But no one cast the charm. Instead, voices drifted from within headquarters, and she could hear every word. She froze so suddenly that Lucius noticed. "What is it?" he whispered, concern lacing his tone. Narcissa didn't respond, but Lucius edged closer and extended his own ear toward the window. Minerva, Remus, be especially careful at the ministry. We know they've tightened security since Azkaban. Remember, they could already suspect aerial intervention. It was Kingsley Shacklebolt's deep voice, steady and commanding. Bill, Fleur, Sturgis, you'll be taking firebolts. Hogsmeade has the largest area, so we need to cover that ground quickly. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Hagrid, Molly, Arthur, Kingsley continued, you and I should be able to shower our leaflets down on Diagon Alley, even with the no apparition in place, as long as the rain gets through, so should these, until they cast a specialized screening charm. And we've heard that hasn't happened yet. Narcissa felt her mouth go dry. This was the very event they had been hoping for. It sounded as if half of the Order would be exposed, vulnerable to attack, and they had mentioned Draco's name among those who would remain behind, uninvolved. Yet here, on the brink of success, a sharp doubt pierced her thoughts. These doubts had plagued her since Azkaban, and now they intensified. 600 were free and loyal to the Order. Were their chances really so impossible? Could Draco be right, that lying low and staying hidden was the family's best chance for survival? As she drifted through the leaves each day, Narcissa had found a semblance of comfort in her invisibility. Did she truly want to intervene? What if they simply put down the mirror and waited, come what may? Lucius murmured, already pulling parchment from his pocket and scribbling notes. A date. Give us the date. The youngest Weasley boy's voice chimed in with the crucial information. The plan was set to take place 3 days from now, on March 24th, at daybreak. Relief washed over Lucius's face as he grasped Narcissa's cold hands in his large, warm ones. In that moment, her doubts began to fade. Lucius had always been a source of strength, intelligent and ambitious, devoted to her in ways she had never been to herself. He constantly sought more for their family, while she might have settled for the status quo. Are you certain this is the best way? She whispered, concern lacing her voice. Yes, he replied softly, and she found herself trusting him completely. That night, they shared every detail with Bellatrix. The headquarters buzzed with energy the night before the flyover. The front room was covered in maps, contingency plans, and diagrams of evasive maneuvers, all reminiscent of Quidditch practice. Draco sat on a cushion by the hearth, observing the flurry of activity among the members of the Order. Ron was noticeably spreading out a map of the routes near Pansy, while Sturgis Podmore and Professor McGonagall polished the handles of their firebolts on the coffee table. Draco couldn't recall ever seeing McGonagall look so captivated by anything before. Restlessness gnawed at him. Like most of the younger members of the Order, he would be sitting out the flyover. Those who were flying, like Ron, had been assigned to remote villages far from any real danger. So far, Draco hadn't felt any pressing need to get involved. After all, the Order had been planning this for months, and he had no reason to question Kingsley's and McGonagall's decisions on where to send each flyer. Yet, with the air thick with anticipation, a part of him longed to be up there flying. He pushed his left sleeve up just enough to glimpse the edge of the dark mark, a reminder of the darker forces at play. Earlier that day, he and Hermione had experimented with the Elder Wand for his daily unraveler. He had dared to hope that it could eliminate the remnants of the tattoo. But Hermione had bitten her lip in uncertainty. For something like this, she explained, using the Elder Wand instead of a regular wand is like choosing an airplane over a car for travel. It's just a more powerful way to reach the same destination. Unfortunately, her instincts had proven accurate. When Draco cast the charm, the edges of the tattoo transformed from a deep black to a softer, more faded shade, but within the hour, it had reverted to its original state. The curse was lifted, but the mark would linger for quite some time. Still, his body felt like his own again. The part of him that had always fretted over an accidental summons had finally quieted. The connection was severed. Just as he was pulling his sleeve back down, something slammed hard into his back, causing him to leap away from the hearth. The flames had turned a vivid emerald green, and a disheveled young woman staggered into the front room. The murmurs hushed, every eye fixed on the messenger. "It's Shacklebolt," she gasped. "He's injured." Coming through from the safe house now. Cries erupted throughout the room as Kingsley's tall frame stumbled out of the flue, clutching a bloodied cloth to his face. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley rushed forward to steady him at the elbows. "What happened?" Mrs. Weasley asked, her face pale. Kingsley groaned, pressing the cloth more tightly against his eye. "We didn't have enough people." The messenger panted. "It was supposed to be a straightforward raid on a snatcher camp in Bristol. We heard they'd kidnapped a muggle-born 9-year-old and tortured her parents. She must have been a lure. There were Aurors there, Ministry." "Thank you, Viridian," Professor McGonagall said, her face ashen. "You may go, Fleur, Remus, outside." Immediately. The Order was well accustomed to tending to injuries by this point. Kingsley was assisted back to his tent by the usual group of those experienced in healing magic. As they departed, Fred turned to a horrified-looking Percy and said grimly, "He'll be all right, Perce. He's a senior Auror, half of them have scars the size of whales." "Yeah," George chimed in, and it was starting to look odd, Kingsley being so intact while the rest of the Order looked like this. He gestured to where his left ear used to be. Percy let out a faint choking sound. But as the door closed behind Kingsley, the remaining members of the Order exchanged glances at the maps, the firebolts, the meticulously crafted plans they had developed over the past months. Bill voiced the question that hung in the air: who's going to cover for Kingsley? "We need someone to take his spot at the Diagon Alley drop. We can handle it, Bill," Hagrid replied from his magically expanded seat by the window. "Molly, Arthur, and I don't think so." "Hagrid," Ron said uneasily, tracing the flyover map. His earlier bravado vanished. "There's too much ground to cover for just 3 of us. We can't give them time to react, and we've got to charm the pamphlets down chimneys at Diagon, through windows, the whole lot." Potter, as if jolted back to reality by Kingsley's injury for the first time in weeks, spoke up. "I'll fly his route." "No," came the chorus from about 6 people. "Harry, dear, you need to stay here and be safe," Mrs. Weasley insisted. "This mission, especially in London, is far too exposed for the head of the Order. And don't even think about it, Ginny, you're underage." Seated beside Harry, Ginny clenched her jaw, anger flashing in her eyes. Guilt settled on Potter's face at the mention of being the head of the Order. Good, Draco thought, not without irritation. After weeks of hearing nothing from Potter but theories about the Deathly Hallows, maybe he was finally remembering what was at stake. He was meant to be Wizarding Britain's last hope. Draco scanned the front room, then let out a sigh. "I'll fly Shacklebolt's route." "What?" Hermione and Pansy exclaimed in unison. "Are either of you going to do it?" Draco challenged. "Because, as far as I can see, everyone else in this room is either assigned to a different route, underage, injured, pregnant, or Harry Potter." Hermione and Pansy exchanged uncertain glances. Pansy was terrified of heights, and Draco knew that Hermione wasn't exactly steady on a broom. "You're awfully young for a central route," Mrs. Weasley said, studying Draco with a conflicted expression. "He's of age, Molly," Arthur Weasley pointed out. "And unlike our volunteers at the safe houses, he's been familiar with the contingency plans for Diagon for weeks. He'll be much better prepared. Besides, he flew for Slytherin for 5 years," added a voice from the mantel. Draco looked over to see George Weasley giving him an encouraging nod. "He'll be fine." "We could hit a few bludgers at you to get you back in form," Fred chimed in. Draco found himself grinning. along with a few others in the room. "Tell you what," Hagrid said. "Kingsley was supposed to fly at the rear. I'll take that spot on my bike instead. More exposed, see?" He turned to Draco. "You'll take the center spot, all right, Malfoy?" Draco nodded, and they continued to discuss adjustments to the plan. Yet, he could still feel Hermione's worried gaze on him. He glanced over at her and slipped his hand into his pocket, reminding himself that he had the Elder Wand by his side. The anxiety on her face eased a little. The next morning, as Draco rose before dawn and quietly stepped out of his parents' tent, he was startled to find them already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with buttered toast. His parents were early risers, but he hadn't anticipated seeing them before the flyover. "Draco," his mother said, noticing him. "You're awake early." "Yeah," he replied, still trying to shake off the remnants of sleep. Draco hesitated. If everything went according to plan, the flyover would take less than an hour, and he'd be back before breakfast. But if something went wrong? He couldn't shake the memory of the fear on his parents' faces when he returned from Azkaban. Despite the months of tension and uncertainty, he didn't want to add to their worries. "I'll be back by 7:45, he assured them. He could see the fatigue in their expressions begin to fade. "Where are you going?" Lucius asked, his tone sharp. Draco glanced at the clock. He was running late. "The Order needs me for another one of their plans," he replied, striding toward the tent flap. "No," Lucius said firmly, standing up. Draco paused at the entrance. Both his parents were now on their feet, their faces a mix of fear and shock. "Absolutely not," Lucius continued. "We told you that under no circumstances should you get involved in another one of their schemes, Draco. We were explicit about this." Draco felt his mouth tighten into a line. "And I told you I'm making sure they trust me." "Draco," his mother started, but he was already slipping out into the dark garden. He took a swig from his polyjuice flask and disapparated to the remote field they had designated as their meeting point. Anticipation sparked in his nerves as he surveyed the starlit field. Over 100 flyers stood lined up beside the brooms they had borrowed from the Nimbus warehouse the previous weekend. Order members and allies from safe houses moved among them, dark silhouettes illuminated by the moonlight. "There you are," Hermione said breathlessly, hurrying up to him. "The Weasleys and Hagrid are waiting for you." "Right," Draco replied, feeling a little off balance. The initial excitement had shifted into something heavier. He had slept well enough the night before, but the encounter with his parents had left him rattled for reasons he couldn't quite understand. He hadn't intended to see them. Hermione studied his face, a crease forming between her brows. "Are you all right?" Draco took a deep breath, trying to regain his focus. He drew his wand and said, "More than all right, unbeatable, remember?" Hermione swallowed hard, and he could sense the effort it took for her to smile back at him. "Unbeatable," she echoed. Draco leaned closer to the handle of his firebolt, allowing himself to revel in the thrill of being back on a broomstick. The early morning air rushed around him, and the firebolt soared like nothing he had ever experienced before. The wind picked up as he, Hagrid, and Mr. and Mrs. Weasley flew toward London. They had apparat close to the city, Hagrid by side along, and kicked off about 10 minutes earlier. Draco could just make out the outlines of the others' disillusioned forms as they hurtled through the low, frigid clouds. As he flew, Draco found his parents' voices echoing strangely in his mind. He could understand their fear after everything that had happened with Azkaban, but their shock seemed like an overreaction. He had reassured them time and again that he was working to stay in the Order's good graces. This was just another step in that direction, wasn't it? He narrowed his eyes against the wind, pushing aside a stir of guilt. He knew his parents must be frantic back at the tent, but there hadn't been any other choice for the flyover, yet still, he could hear his mother's voice. A distant cry, "Draco, Draco." As they approached Diagon Alley, which was under a no-apparition rule, meaning no one could enter from above, they became visible as they circled downward. Diagon Alley seemed to rise up from the map of London below, gently pushing aside rows of Muggle buildings to reveal its long, narrow central street, along with its offshoots, Nocturne Alley, Occasion Alley, and several others, each filled with hundreds of shops and apartments. the sun peeked over the horizon, casting a beautiful, misty dawn across the scene. Despite having flown through stretches of icy clouds, Draco felt surprisingly comfortable. With the Elder Wand, he had cast a sense of confidence around him. Draco had cast a powerful warming charm, one he was confident would have earned him an O on his charm's NEWT. As they drew closer to Diagon Alley, he could see hundreds of witches and wizards bustling along the pathways, appearing as small as insects. Just then, as he unclipped his satchel full of leaflets, he heard his mother's voice calling out, "Draco." He caught the flicker of shock on their faces, and unease began to swell within him, a sensation so intense that his fingers slipped on the broom handle. An unsettling thought emerged, connecting everything his parents had said and done since their arrival. It tied back to the attack on Aberforth and the way they had been so alert that morning. As if they were waiting for him, wanting to ensure something, Draco's heart sank, though he hadn't changed the angle of his broom. Hagrid's engine revved in the distance. "Ready?" Mrs. Weasley called. "Wait," Draco gasped. "Wait, Quaffle." The code word made everyone pull back instantly, rising high into the sky and into the cloud cover. The Weasleys lifted their disillusionment charms as Mr. Weasley asked, "Is something wrong, Draco?" "If you're worried, you don't have to join us, dear," Mrs. Weasley panted. "3/4 of the area is better than nothing." "Here, I'll take your leaflets," said a still disillusioned Hagrid. "I can drop them where, it's not that." Draco interrupted, "I think." His throat tightened. He couldn't voice his suspicions about his parents, not to the Weasleys, not to Hagrid. Instead, he forced out another thought, his words spilling out in a rush. "Isn't it suspicious that Kingsley's group was overpowered last night? They said the intelligence was solid, just a few snatchers, but it turned out to be a dozen Aurors. And that was less than 12 hours before our flyover. What if someone leaked our plans?" Arthur shook his head. "I'm afraid we have to distribute these pamphlets, no matter the risk," someone urged. "But if they know our plans," Draco replied urgently, "they'll be ready to stop the pamphlets. It'll be pointless." "We've got to try, Malfoy," Hagrid insisted. "We've come this far, we can't just turn back now." Draco shook his head, his panic quickly blending with anger. They weren't listening to him. To them, he was just a frightened child, unwilling to confront the reality that they might be walking into an ambush. There was no time for debate. If others across the country were falling into traps, he needed to act now. With determination, Draco grasped the broom handle, unslung the satchel of leaflets from his shoulder, and shot downward. Mrs. Weasley's surprised voice called out behind him as Diagon Alley came back into view, bustling with tiny figures moving in clusters. Still disillusioned, Draco leveled the firebolt's handle mid-air, bringing himself to an abrupt stop. In a swift motion, he passed the Elder Wand over the satchel to disillusion it as well. Then he swished and flicked, Wingardium Leviosa. He guided the invisible satchel 200 meters ahead. After lifting both enchantments, the satchel plummeted, becoming visible once more. As it fell, it twisted and swayed, releasing its contents into the air. They began to flutter toward Diagon Alley, swirling into a diffuse white cloud. For a fleeting moment, Draco wondered if he had been mistaken, if his anxiety about his parents was merely a paranoid instinct. But then, a dozen blasting charms erupted from the rooftops of Diagon Alley. Shooting skyward toward the spot where the satchel had originated, they collided with a thunderous bang, resembling a colossal firework. Even from 200 meters away, the shockwave sent Draco's broom spiraling backward. When he regained control, he saw the meticulously crafted leaflets burning to ashes, intercepted by a screening charm before they could reach the ground. Draco swore under his breath, turning the broom around to regroup. The stormy sky, Draco urged his broom higher into the clouds. Robed figures on brooms erupted from the perimeter of Diagon Alley, dozens of them. By the time Draco rejoined the Weasleys and Hagrid, their initial shock had morphed into palpable fear. "We have to apparate," Draco shouted, urgency lacing his voice. Arthur dashed to Hagrid's side, gripping his elbow tightly. "Hold on to that bike, Hagrid," he panted. As colorful jets of light crisscrossed the sky, they all twisted mid-air and vanished. They barely reappeared in the launch field when Mr. and Mrs. Weasley bolted toward Hermione, Harry, and Ginny. "Hermione, your medallion," Arthur called out as Draco and Hagrid sprinted after them. Quickly, the emergency signal. "I just hope we're in time," gasped Mrs. Weasley, scanning the area anxiously. "We made good time." But the others. Pale with fear, Hermione fumbled to remove the necklace from around her neck. The lead flyers of each group wore matching medallions imbued with protean charms. In emergencies like this, they could alter Hermione's medallion, causing the others to heat up and change to match, signaling an immediate end to the mission. With determination, Hermione touched the tip of her wand to the medallion. A corresponding glow emanated from the chain around Mr. Weasley's neck. Almost instantly, other flyers began to apparate back to the field, appearing by the dozen. They looked bewildered and worried, but thankfully, none were injured. Within 15 minutes, all 109 flyers had returned. A few, assigned to the smallest villages, had already begun their drop when the signal was issued, but they hadn't encountered any ambush, so they didn't know everything, Draco thought, feeling a numbness settle in. His parents hadn't known everything either. Remus stepped forward to address the gathered flyers, delivering a brief but encouraging speech about focusing their reinformation efforts on undercover distribution methods. With that, their allies returned to the safe house, and the Order assembled in the heart of the gathering storm. The field was tense. "How did you know, Draco?" Remus asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I don't know," Draco replied, avoiding the eyes of the Order. "Instinct, maybe," he added flatly. "I started thinking about the attack on Kingsley last night. It felt too coincidental. I just wanted to make sure." "It's a major blow," Bill chimed in, tugging his hair free from its ponytail. "I suppose you're right, Remus. We can try distributing the leaflets by hand instead, but I'm worried it won't be enough to counteract the profit." Mrs. Weasley, her hands resting protectively on the twins' shoulders, interjected, "We'll discuss it back at headquarters." "Come on, now, let's head back and have some breakfast." "I think I'll go to the drop location first," Hermione said, her voice trembling slightly. "Ron, Harry, Draco, shall we do a bit of supply distribution before returning to headquarters?" They nodded in agreement. While the rest of the Order made their way back to Potter Cottage, the four of them apparat to the cave, now freshly stocked with supplies. Crates of produce reached up to the ceiling, with baskets full of bread teetering on top. Rice and potatoes strained against their burlap sacks, and other supplies appeared to have been purchased from Muggle supermarkets. Draco sank onto a crate, staring blankly at one of the cheerful logos. "It was my parents," he said before anyone else could speak. "My parents have been passing information to the Death Eaters." The others fell silent, their faces reflecting their shock. "I don't know how they've been doing it," Draco forced out, "and I only realized it at Diagon Alley. They were awake this morning and tried to stop me from going. It's because they tipped off the Death Eaters, so they knew there'd be an ambush." Hermione closed her eyes, processing the revelation. Then Aberforth wasn't betrayed by someone in his network. "And the twins' signal getting jammed last month," Potter added, his voice heavy with realization. "And Kingsley, last night. It's all because of them." Draco nodded, a wave of anger washing over him. As he lifted a hand to his face, he realized his fingers were trembling. "That's why they'd been pushing me to spy. They needed to know I was on their side before revealing what they've been up to. What if I tried to stop them?" His voice rose, filled with frustration. "I've been trying to keep them out of this, and all the while, they've been putting everyone in danger." "But they haven't," Hermione said softly. Draco turned to her, searching for reassurance in her expression. "They haven't gotten anyone killed," she asserted more firmly. "No one was hurt today. This morning could have been a massacre, but you stopped that." "She's right," Weasley added, his voice steady. "Look, Malfoy, even if we tell the Order about your parents, no one will think you had anything to do with it. You've been helping us for half a year now. We know you're not like them." Draco felt the anger seep away, leaving behind a strange sense of sobriety. Weasley was right, he was no longer like his parents. They had lied to him. His family was supposed to be a united front, together from the first breath to the last, the Malfoys against the world. Yet, they had withheld something so significant, while he too had been keeping secrets, with all three of them lying to each other. What did family mean anymore? He pictured his mother and father, younger and healthier, laughing as they watched him play atop Half-Hold Hill. "Maybe this isn't what you want to hear," Potter said slowly, breaking through his reverie, "but this could be useful. We've been working on a plan to regain the Death Eaters' trust in you, but we don't need to anymore. They already trust your parents. When we're ready to set that trap, the groundwork is already laid." Draco nodded. Potter sounded more focused than he had in a long time. Since they learned about the Hallows, at least that brought him some relief. "I just don't understand how they're doing it," Hermione said, her brow furrowed in thought. "They don't have a wand between them. Could there be something in the twins' tent that they've adapted for magical communication? I thought we stripped the place clean." "I'll find out what it is," Draco replied, determination in his voice. "And Potter, I'll need to borrow the cloak." When Draco returned to his parents' tent, he noticed his mother's eyes were reddened, as if she had been crying. They both stood up abruptly as he entered. "Draco," his father said, looking closely. Draco could see the relief etched on Lucius's narrow features, a reflection of his own. He could sense the remnants of fear that perhaps Lucius had betrayed him to his doom. For a fleeting moment, Draco wondered if they might finally confess what they were doing, what they had done. The danger they had unwittingly placed upon him. He waited, giving them the chance to speak, but neither of them uttered a word. That night, shrouded in the cloak, Draco crept down the hallway to his parents' door. Crouching, he peered through the keyhole. "Will not be pleased," his father's voice carried through. "This should have been a masterstroke." "We did all we could," his mother replied quietly. "The rest was in her hands. Come. It's nearly time." Draco watched as his father joined his mother at the desk. She retrieved something glimmering from a drawer, a hand mirror. They had no wands, but no incantation was necessary. "Bellatrix Lestrange," his mother said, directing her words to the mirror. His aunt's face materialized. Her dramatic features twisted in anger. "Sissy," she snapped. "Explain yourself." For the next 2 weeks, Draco did little else but follow his parents, invisible, observing their every move. He could never predict when they might return to the mirror, and the Gryffindors had pointed out that Bellatrix might reveal some of the Death Eaters' plans. Draco knew they were right. This secret access was a crucial advantage, that Bellatrix might be a more valuable source of intelligence than any other, but that wasn't the only reason he wanted to keep an eye on her. There was something almost addictive about seeing his parents unmasked, piecing together the truth for himself. It took him several days to gather the basic facts. Before his parents arrived at headquarters, Bellatrix had discovered that the Malfoys were still alive and cornered them. They had promised her inside information in exchange for their lives. Otherwise, his aunt would have killed them and made it her mission to eliminate Draco next. To protect him, his parents had also deceived Bellatrix. They told her that he had been acting under the effects of the Confundus charm, possibly even the Imperious curse. They claimed he was working daily to gain the Order's trust in order to position himself favorably. Draco realized that their actions had been aimed at keeping the family alive and safe. He clung to that notion, telling himself it wasn't so different from the way he had been raised. Yet, he couldn't help but see his parents in a new light. His mother was a cipher, quiet in a way that was different from how she had been at the manor or even last summer at Grimmauld Place, when she followed his father out to the hedges, where they spent most of their days trying to eavesdrop. There was a listlessness in her movements. In contrast, his father was more agitated than he had been during Draco's childhood. His emotions seemed to catch him off guard, his fear of Bellatrix revealing their secrets to Voldemort, his longing for acceptance among the Death Eaters, and his hopes for Draco's future. He expressed these feelings with sudden jerks, as if his thoughts had snagged on something sharp. Forcing them loose, Bellatrix, however, had not changed at all. It felt strange to listen to her again, Draco remembered once admiring Bella for her infamy as a duelist, her high rank among the Death Eaters, and her unwavering adherence to pure-blood traditions. Now, as he distanced himself from those very traditions, he found himself struck by the stark contrast, own mouth to stifle a gasp at her words. Her tone was insipid and repetitive, filled with nothing but excuses to insult Muggleborns and non-wizards. It was as if every topic was manipulated to elevate her own status, a constant reminder of how blessed she felt to bask in the Dark Lord's reflected glory. Yet, deep down, Draco knew that Voldemort cared little for Bellatrix, just as he had for him. He had humiliated her in front of the other Death Eaters, yet she remained fixated on winning back his approval, striving to reclaim the favor she believed she had lost to Snape. This realization filled Draco with a mix of pity and disdain. That wasn't ambition, it was debasement. Whenever he sat outside his parents' door with quill and parchment in hand, he listened intently, jotting down anything that hinted at the Death Eaters' plans. Day after day, he gathered information, but in early April, he overheard something that stood out from the usual talk of anti-Muggle legislation and plans for expansion abroad. It began innocuously enough, with Bellatrix whispering about the future. "We must be ready to deliver Potter when the Dark Lord returns to Britain," she said. "A secure location, where Potter cannot wriggle free. Will Draco be prepared? The Dark Lord has intimated to me that he hopes to arrive by May to take his rightful place in the ministry." "Yes," his father replied smoothly. Every day, Draco's faith in the Order weakens. He is trusted now, he is perfectly positioned to act. Once the Dark Lord returns, convincing him to turn Potter over will be easy. Bellatrix sighed, and even through the keyhole, Draco could sense the delight on her face. Then our family's name will be restored. Sissy. It will be as it once was, Lucius, among the Death Eaters. We will surpass Snape and reclaim our place at the Dark Lord's right hand, we, his most trusted inner circle, who drank from the cup of the Dark Lord's covenant. We will hold the ranks we are owed. Her words struck Draco like a slap, forcing him to press his palm against his mouth to stifle a gasp. Draco clamped his mouth shut, desperate to stifle any sound. "Come on," he urged silently, willing Bellatrix to continue. Surely, she wouldn't stop there. He had listened to hours of her fervent speeches in recent weeks. Surely, his mother murmured, the Dark Lord has also shared the cup of the covenant with Severus. Bellatrix's face flushed with indignation. "The Dark Lord values old loyalty," she hissed. "The covenant was meant for us alone, his first, his most devoted followers, who pledged our lives before the war even began." A note of smug pride crept into her voice. "No, Sissy, no Death Eater will drink from it again, not even Snape. That much, I can guarantee." Their conversation shifted to the old ranks of Death Eaters, long since gone, but Draco could no longer focus. He bolted from the tent and dashed into the garden, then raced up to the cottage. He found the others gathered in Potter and Weasley's room, absorbed in their reading. "She has the horcrux," he panted. All three of them shot upright. "Who?" Hermione asked, her eyes wide. "Bellatrix, he gave my father the diary." "He gave Bellatrix the cup."